Grahame, the Father's Day trip from the Prime Minister, you heard his response to me earlier this afternoon. What do you make of it?
Well, he didn't do anything wrong for a start. He was allowed to go back to see his kids. He hadn't seen them for about 2 months with all the quarantine stuff and overseas trips and all that. And it crossed my mind, what would you say to the kids if they said, look, he's coming home for Father's Day, Dad? What's he to say? No, because some second-rate B-grade journo might talk about it. And apart from that, I've known every Prime Minister from John Gorton on, and one of them preferred to be anywhere except with his own family, and it wasn't very nice to watch. Australians expect their leader to have some family values, and this Prime Minister does. And what he did was not wrong. He was allowed to do it. But, once the journos get a sniff of something, away we go.
Bruce Hawker, to you on this. I hope Grahame wasn't referring to me as a second-rate B grader, but anyway, we'll move on from that. Bruce, what did you think of the reaction from Prime Minister Morrison earlier in the day?
Well, first of all, I want to know who the Prime Minister was who never wanted to spend any time with his kids from Grahame. I've got a feeling I know who it was, but I don't think I'll say anything about it on television. Look, it's one of those issues that can break both ways, isn't it, really? You can have a spirited defence like we just saw from Grahame, and a lot of people would nod their heads to that and say, well, it was just for one day, he works hard, etc. Then there's a lot of people who say, well, I don't get the benefit of that. Half the country's in lockdown, I'm in lockdown, and I think I should get the same sort of treatment as the Prime Minister. We're not a country that is presidential in nature, really. Presidents get away with that sort of thing. Prime Ministers are always dragged back to the pack pretty quickly. So I think some people will say, well, fair enough, and others will say, look, this was not a good look. Anthony Albanese, he didn't get the same sort of benefits. Labor leaders haven't, Labor politicians haven't. So why should he? There is that egalitarianism in the Australian public which will look down at this, but there are many people who will just say that what Grahame just said, look, it was Father's Day, why shouldn't he have some time with the kids?
Yeah, indeed, and including a couple of people on the Labor side. Now, Grahame, Daniel Andrews saying that Victoria has missed out on its allocation of vaccines, as has a few of the other states. The Prime Minister, again, he says that's not his view of the way it's been managed, but it shows you once again how the Prime Minister has basically, throughout this year, is going to face 8 extra opposition leaders because all the states are into him quite regularly.
Yeah, I agree. But it's almost as if Daniel Andrews decided, hey, there's a new opposition leader there who's going to get a lot of publicity. I'll up the ante and out publicity him. The Premier knew damn well that when Victoria needed extra help, it got the extra help. This time, New South Wales needed extra help and they got it. But the Prime Minister then topped up. He got all this stuff from overseas, as I understand it. Then it went to the other states, not to New South Wales. And I thought that was fair. Did Daniel Andrews really want to give back all the vaccines that he got when he really needed it, when Victoria was in trouble? Doubt it. No, there was something else going on in his mind. And in fairness to Daniel Andrews, in recent months, he and the PM have been a pretty good duet, actually.
Bruce Hawker, this is, in a broad sense, the vulnerability for the Prime Minister, because when you've got outbreaks like in Sydney or in Melbourne, it doesn't matter if they're Liberal or Labor, the Premiers, if they're disagreeing with the government, it does mean that some of the flack will be felt by the feds.
Indeed. And look, the relationship between the Prime Minister and Gladys Berejiklian, for example, is poisonous. No doubt about that. What she's saying behind the scenes, some of the less muted sort of comments from her ministers and from her, for that matter, about the slowness of the vaccine rollout shows that there's very real tension between the Prime Minister and various state premiers. And of course, on top of that, you've seen a rather concerted campaign by the feds against Andrews when he went into lockdown. And now, of course, Berejiklian's in the same sort of position, and the feds have not been all that sympathetic towards her on more than one occasion. So yes, this thing really has to be controlled by the states to a large extent, COVID. If the states don't want to open the borders won't open. And so he has to kowtow to them to some extent. The best thing he could do right now is to keep getting the vaccine rolled out as quickly as he can to as many people, make sure that if Victoria has been dudded by 300,000 doses, that they're topped up, and to move on with it. That's his job.
Grahame, the lib spill, it's been a few months, another spill, this time in Melbourne, and Matthew Guy returns to the job. He's got a challenge ahead of him. Whatever you say about Daniel Andrews, he is a very competent politician and communicator.
Yeah. Look, I wish Matthew Guy best of luck. A mate of mine came back second time round, called Howard, and he became second longest Prime Minister in this country. He and the people around him, some of those pot plants with lips around him, have got to learn this. They have to give the undecided voters and the swinging voters in Victoria a reason not to vote Labor. And then the second one is, we should vote Liberal. And just sitting there being statesmen and all, so they've got to get in and have a go and give people a reason not to vote Labor. And that takes a bit of guts, a bit of creativity, a lot of hard work. And it's the job of the opposition. But it shouldn't be just left all the time to the leader, as they seem to do down there.
Bruce Hawker, it is going to be a challenge. It's a bit over 12 months, though. November next year is when Daniel Andrews is up for re-election. And I tell you what, he's a potent politician.
He is. He's battle hardened. He's gone through the toughest period that any Premier in my memory has gone through, and has come out the other side looking pretty solid. So it's going to be a good operation by the opposition to be able to knock him off next time. That having been said, is not impossible by any stretch of the imagination. As Grahame said, Howard did it. Kennett did it in Victoria, who was an unsuccessful opposition leader, dropped, came back, was very successful as Premier. Barnett did it in WA. I think even Ted Baillieu did it in Victoria as well. So there is a bit of a history of this. It's a question of whether he's learnt his lessons from when he was the opposition leader last time around. And I would say that it is a very challenging time for oppositions to get public sympathy. Because if you go in too hard at times like this, then there's a tendency on the part of the public to say, well, hang on, the only thing between us and chaos is this Premier, and I think we should be very careful about going too hard on him. So as Grahame says, you have to be very creative, but at the end of the day, you have to find fault with them. They have to be exposed for the fault, and then you have to actually exploit that to your success. In the election campaign. No mean feat for any state opposition leader to do that at the moment.
Bruce, Grahame, gentlemen, thank you as always.
Yeah, man.